today. And I want to today teach you about who we are, why we call ourselves Ukrainian Greek Catholics, why we are different than our neighbors down the road, where we come from. So, Ukrainian Greek Catholics, there are 4 parts to that term. Ukrainian, Greek, well, 3, I guess. Ukrainian Greek Catholic. And then church is the 4th word I was thinking of. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Who has a guess as to why we call ourselves those things? Someone. Why do we call ourselves Ukrainian when we're all Americans? Someone. Yes. Yes and no. Yes. So, how about Greek? Why do we call ourselves Greek Catholics? One of the apostolic sees. Yes. Yes. Okay. So, what do we hear at the end of the Gospel of Matthew? Matthew 28. We hear this at Matins every once in a while. We hear it every time we have a baptism. Christ told his apostles, what did he say? Go forth, baptize all nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to keep all that I have commanded you, and I am with you even into the end of the age. Right? All nations. So the apostles, there were the 12 apostles and the 70 apostles. They went forth in pairs throughout the whole world. And they brought the gospel of Jesus Christ. They brought their knowledge of God because they walked and lived with him for those 3 years. They brought the sacraments. They did not bring a book. They did not bring a liturgy book or a missal or even a Bible. They taught orally. And they went into all the regions of the world. Peter went to Antioch and then later went to Rome. Thomas went to India. James went to Spain. Mark went to Egypt. Philip and Andrew went to the Black Sea region, etc., etc. They spread out like a fan, like the rays of the sun throughout the Mediterranean world, and they preached the gospel. And they would get to a local region where they spoke a different language, and they had a different culture, and they sang a little bit differently, and they dressed a little bit differently. And they didn't say, well, now you all have to be Greeks, or you all have to be Jews, because that's what they were. They were Greek-speaking Jews. No, they took the local culture, and they baptized it. Like Christ said, they baptized all nations. So they took their way of singing. They took their way of dress. They took their way of whatever, and they used that as an instrument to preach the gospel. And so you have Greeks speaking in Greek, praying in Greek, using their philosophical language. Greek is a language of philosophy. You can say the same thing 6 different times with very slight nuances each time. There are multiple words that have very similar meanings, right? And that's why our prayers are the way they are, because they come from Greek. Whereas in the western half of the Mediterranean world, they spoke Latin. Latin is a language of law. There's not a lot of very fine nuances. Things are very clear, very black and white. And the prayers in the Latin tradition are succinct and to the point. Whereas in Greek, we like to be very flowery and complicated. And if something's worth saying, we say it 3 times, right? That's the way it works. Well, and then you have the Copts in Egypt who use the Coptic language, and they do things their own way. Or the Syro-Malabar and Syro-Malankar in India, that they do things their own way. And so you have in each of these local places a culture that's become a Christian culture. And the apostles appointed bishops to oversee all of these places. So Mark, like I said, he's considered the first patriarch of Alexandria. St. Andrew is the first patriarch of Constantinople. Peter, of course, the first patriarch of Rome, etc., etc. There are all these apostolic sees, as you said. Now, when the Roman Empire became Christian, St. Constantine the Great moved the capital from Rome to a little town on the Bosporus called Byzantium. And he renamed the city of Byzantium New Rome. Later, it became known as Constantine's city, Constantinopolis, Constantine's city. And this became the center of not only the government of the empire, but of the church. And so it became the Patriarchate of Constantinople. The empire was split into the Latin-speaking Western Roman Empire and the Greek-speaking Eastern Roman Empire. And you have, like I said, the Patriarch in Rome, Pope. You have the Patriarch in Constantinople. And they did things their own way. They spoke Latin, they spoke Greek, they prayed in Latin, we prayed in Greek. In around the 9th century, missionaries were sent forth from Constantinople up into the Slavic lands. And so you have first Cyril and Methodius, who, by the way, were sent not just by the Patriarch of Constantinople, but also by the Pope. They had a double blessing to go evangelize the Slavs. And Cyril and Methodius, were Greek-speaking Slavs from Macedonia, where there were a lot of Slavs at the time, and they translated the Divine Liturgy and the Gospel of John and the Psalms into Church Slavonic. They invented the language of Church Slavonic as a pan-Slavic language that all the different Slavic tribes would understand. They translated these books and later more, but they started out with the Liturgy and the Gospel of John, into Church Slavonic. They invented the alphabet for it, and the first liturgy in Church Slavonic was celebrated in the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, which is where, you recall, I was given that relic of St. Andrew. So they went up into the Slavic lands and preached the faith to the pagan Slavs that were there. Later, St. Vladimir the Great, who was the Grand Prince of Kievan Rus, he, like Constantine, baptized his empire, his princedom there, and Kievan Rus became a Christian empire. Kiev was a metropolitan see of Constantinople. And until, I want to say, the 1500s, all of the bishops of Kiev were Greek. That's why, to this day, when we have Vespers with Litia, we sing Kyrie eleison when we pray for the hierarchy, because our bishops were Greek. And when the bishop comes, we'll sing a lot of other things in Greek, because we've just held on to that tradition of praying in Greek with the bishop. So, the Slavs now, though they're outside of the Eastern Roman Empire, they receive the Greek tradition, as you were saying, the Greek tradition from Constantinople. So, then in the 11th century, approximately, there comes a disagreement between East and West. And this, people say, happened in 1054. Now, this was a long process that happened. It is not something that can be said to have happened in a single moment. The long and short of it is East and West stopped talking to each other. And they got into a disagreement and got fed up with each other. And they said, that's it. We're no longer in communion. We call that the Great Schism. And from that point on, the East referred to themselves as Orthodox and the West referred to themselves as Catholics, even though these are not mutually exclusive terms. The proper use of these terms is the Catholic Church holds the Orthodox faith. That is why in our liturgy we call ourselves Orthodox Christians, we pray for Orthodox Christians, and we hold the Orthodox faith. But they began to use these terms, right? Every time you get in a disagreement with someone, you're wrong and I'm right, right? With your family members, you're wrong and I'm right. Well, that's what they were doing. They say, no, I'm the Catholic one. No, I'm the Orthodox one. And so they become these terms just to say the other person's wrong. And that's how they've developed, and that's how they're unfortunately often used still to this day. And so you have the Latin-speaking Roman Catholic Church and the Greek-speaking and now Slavic-speaking Orthodox churches not in communion with each other. And in the 1440s, there was a council to try to reunite East and West. This was the Council of Florence. The Catholic Church calls it the Ecumenical Council of Florence. And all of the Greek bishops gathered there in Florence, and the Latin bishops were there, and they hashed out, what are we disagreeing about? How do we go about straightening all this stuff out? And this council was seen as a reunion between equal churches. It was not seen as a union of the Catholic Church and people who aren't. It was seen as the one church with a disagreement on the inside, and we're going to work it out together. That's how it was seen. And all of the Greek bishops, except for one, signed the document of reunion, and they rang all the bells, and they said, union has been achieved, glory to God. And the Pope wrote an encyclical, let the heavens rejoice, because the rift of East and West has been overcome. And then all the Greek bishops went back to Constantinople and rescinded their decision and said, well, we don't want to be in union anyway. And that's where it was left. However, one of those Greek bishops, remember I said that the Metropolitan See of Kiev was a Greek bishop. One of those Greek bishops, Bishop Metropolitan Isidore, he was the Metropolitan of Kiev at the time, our Metropolitan. He did not rescind his decision to sign the Council of Florence. He went back to Kiev and proclaimed the union to all of his people, and all the people accepted it. And he continued to go celebrate the Sunday liturgies and proclaim the union, and everybody accepted it. So our church has been in full communion with Rome since the Council of Florence. That's what the Catechism of our church says. That's what Metropolitan Boris says in his book on the union. Now, he went to Moscow, which was also part of his metropolitanate, and he did preach the union there, and the Muscovites had nothing to do with it and put him in prison for it. So he literally escaped from prison to return back to Kiev and Rus. But the Muscovites have not been, shall we say, receptive of such things. In 1596, now between the 1440s, the Union of Florence, and the Union of Brest in 1596, our church can be said to have had a dual communion. We were in communion both with the Patriarch of Constantinople and with the Patriarch of Rome, the Pope, but communication technology was not quite what it is today. So you really had no contact with people outside of your region anyway. But to have a more visible and full communion, our bishops signed the Union of Brest. So they got together, they put together a list of things, of conditions of what we will do to be in communion with Rome. We will not participate in Corpus Christi. We will not be forced to not use bells on Holy Friday. We will continue to observe our tradition. We will, etc., etc. And Rome accepted this. They signed it, and from that moment on, what it was, to use the historical term, the Ruthenian Uniate Church became its own entity, in distinction from the Orthodox of Kiev and Rus. That Ruthenian Uniate Church has been since renamed the Ukrainian Catholic Church. That's our church. So the term Greek Catholic, first of all, Ukraine, because our patriarch is in Kiev. Our church, our synod of bishops, the main body of our faithful is in Ukraine. So we are the Ukrainian church. Greek Catholic, because we have the Greek tradition. We come from our tradition, our liturgy comes from the Church of Constantinople. This term Greek Catholic is an equivalent term to Roman Catholic, right? Because Patriarch of the Latin Church is in Rome. And not everyone in the Roman Catholic Church lives in Italy or is Italian by heritage or anything like that, but their Patriarch, the Pope, is in Rome. So the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Catholic churches who have a shared ancestry there. And church, of course, because we are a church. We are one of 24, we use the term sui juris churches, churches of their own law. We have a head of our church, the Patriarch. We have a synod of bishops. We have, I think, 54 bishops. They just met this last week. They're having liturgy today together. And we have our own canon law. We have our own history, tradition, liturgy. We have the right to publish our own liturgical books, distinct from everybody else. We are, for example, I, a priest here in Cody, am completely independent and have nothing to do with St. Anthony's or the Bishop of Cheyenne. They have no authority over me whatsoever because I have a different bishop. We're a completely independent and separate church. Now, I said 24 churches, 24 Catholic churches. How many of those do you think are Eastern? 23, that's right. There's one Western church, that's the Roman Catholic Church. And then there are 23 Eastern churches. How many of those 23 Eastern churches are Greek Catholic churches? A guess. I don't know the exact number, but a guess. About 17 or 18. I was going to say 16, yes. So you have the churches from the lands inside the Eastern Roman Empire, what's improperly called the Byzantine Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, right? So you have the church of, just speaking of Catholic churches, not Orthodox churches, we have the Hellenic Greek Catholic Church with the exarch in Athens. You have the Bulgarian Greek Catholic Church, the Macedonian Greek Catholic Church, the Slovak Greek Catholic Church, the Church of Croatia, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the Eparchy of Mukachevo, etc., etc. All the Byzantine Catholic Church here in the United States, etc., etc. All churches that use the Liturgy of John Chrysostom, they have their own probably translation, their own local customs, their own music, but if you walk in, you'd understand what's going on, right? Then there are churches from outside the Roman Empire, right? I mentioned the Copts, the Church of Alexandria, right? The Ethiopians and Eritreans, the Armenians, the Syriac, the Maronites, the Syro-Malabar and Syro-Malankara from India. All of these local people with their own language and culture and dress, their vestments will be different, their music will be different, their prayers will be different. They'll have their own liturgical language, right? There's not just Latin and Slavonic, but Syriac and Coptic and Armenian. Those are all liturgical languages as well, right? So the church is Catholic not because it's the same everywhere. In fact, the church is Catholic because all these different local peoples are part of it. All these local cultures and languages and liturgies are all part of the church. Everyone in every place, right? Christ said, baptize all nations. Any questions thus far? So what's this word Byzantine? Sometimes we call ourselves Byzantine. What does that mean? I mentioned it already. Someone tell me. Right, it comes from the city of Byzantium, right? But in terms, as a technical term, we refer to ourselves as Byzantine. What do we mean? We use the Byzantine liturgy, right? The Byzantine rite, as opposed to the Roman rite or the Coptic rite. Now, I want to just make a small clarification here. Yes, it is true that we are, in a sense, Byzantine Catholics. However, this becomes a little confusing because there is a church, a separate Syro-Eurus church here in the United States that calls itself the Byzantine Catholic Church, which we are not. We are the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Now, I always have to criticize the Byzantine Catholic Church for naming itself the Byzantine Catholic Church because there are, as we said, about 15 other Byzantine Catholic churches. And they want to emphasize the fact that they are not an ethnic church, but an American church of the Byzantine Rite. That aside, God bless them, we are not them. Our technical and canonical and proper name is the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Now, the terms Greek Catholic and Byzantine basically mean the same thing. However, the term Byzantine has some baggage. Unfortunately, in the last century, Eastern Catholics were seen as Roman Catholics of the Byzantine Rite. And that is where this name gets its momentum. Basically, you don't have your own theology or patrimony or canonical tradition. You're just Roman Catholics with a funny mass. Unfortunately, that's the way many people have regarded us for a long time. Since the Second Vatican Council, the Church has told us, if you haven't, there's a lot of things that came out of the Second Vatican Council, but the documents on the Eastern churches are very much worth reading. The Church said that the Eastern churches are of equal dignity with the Roman Catholic Church, which was not something that was commonly held in the previous century. The Eastern churches are of equal dignity with the Roman Catholic Church. And the Eastern Catholic faithful everywhere have an obligation to preserve and observe their tradition insofar as it is possible. So we're not supposed to just go to the local Roman Catholic Church and forget who we are. We have an obligation, the Church says, an obligation to practice our Byzantine, our Greek Catholic tradition. And furthermore, the Council says that we are to look to the Orthodox churches as an example of who we are. We're to look to the Orthodox churches as to how to serve the liturgy. We're allowed to use the Orthodox books if we don't have our own, because when full and perfect communion between the Orthodox churches and the Catholic churches is achieved, the Greek Catholic churches, the Eastern Catholic churches, are to be dissolved into their father and mother churches, the Orthodox churches. So when full communion is restored, the Ukrainian Catholic Church will no longer be distinct from the Orthodox Church of Kiev, for example. We will be one unified church. So we are not to make ourselves different because, we're Catholic, we're not Orthodox. We are both Catholic and Orthodox. As Patriarch Sviatoslav said, he was talking about the Russian Orthodox Church. So the Russian Orthodox Church sees our church as a threat, the Ukrainian Catholic Church as a threat to their orthodoxy. And the Patriarch says, we are not a threat to the Orthodox Church. We are an Orthodox Church. We are an Orthodox Church with Orthodox theology and patrimony and canonical tradition and liturgy that chooses to manifest that orthodoxy in the spirit of the first millennium, that is, in communion with the Church of Rome. Those are also the words of John Paul II that said, to seek unity, we have to look in the spirit of the first millennium when there was an undivided church, East and West. So we, as Eastern Catholics, have a special calling. We have a special calling to manifest that unity of East and West, to be both Orthodox and Catholic. Right? As Christ prayed before his passion in the Gospel of John, Father, I pray that they may be one as you and I are one. So we, as Eastern Catholics, are manifesting that unity of the universal church, both East and West, because we are fully Orthodox and fully Catholic at the same time. Questions? Shocked silence. I'm sure there's some questions burning in someone's mind. Please. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. Well, read the documents of the Second Vatican Council about the Eastern churches. The word Orthodox has a number of meanings. The first and literal meaning of the word, right? Orthos, doxia, right glory, right belief. So someone who holds the true faith. So we are certainly, we hope, that we are Orthodox, because the opposite of Orthodox in that sense is heterodox, heretical. We certainly don't want to profess to be heretical, right? There is also a cultural aspect of the word, insofar as the Orthodox churches have, shall we say, their own thing going on, their own liturgical culture. They are distinct from something else, but we also share that because that's our heritage, right? We're the same in that. If I go to an Orthodox church, which I sometimes do for Vespers or something, I am perfectly at home. I know exactly what's going on. I know most of the music. I know the texts. I know the saints, right? It's the same culture. So we're Orthodox in that sense too, right? If you want to speak of a confessional orthodoxy in terms of part of the Catholic Church, part of the Orthodox Church, then we have to, of course, say that we're distinct because we are not in communion with the Orthodox Church. At least we are not in full sacramental communion with the Orthodox Church, right? So I am not allowed, by their own rules, I am not allowed to receive communion in the Orthodox Church. However, the Catholic Church welcomes the faithful to receive, the Orthodox faithful to receive communion in our churches. We, in the Catholic Church, recognize the Orthodox churches as legitimate churches with real sacraments and real priests and real sanctity. And we welcome them to the chalice because we share the same faith. That's the position of the Catholic Church in both the Eastern canon law and the Latin canon law. Other questions?
Can you cover any of the recent developments, maybe the key big items on unification and talks and dialogues, and how that kind of looks like?
Sure. So the Great Schism happened around 1054, right? It was a long 150-year process of development, but solidified by the 13th century. If you remember something that happened in 1204 when the Venetians came into Constantinople and sacked Hagia Sophia and the churches and stole relics and things like that, right? That was a pretty decisive moment in the rift between East and West, right? That was the Fourth Crusade. Some of the main relics of St. Peter's Basilica were taken in that escapade. But in 1964, Pope Paul VI and Patriarch His All Holiness Athenagoras of Constantinople met, and they lifted the mutual excommunications between the Pope and the Patriarch. So, since 1964, at the very least, the Orthodox churches are not to be considered excommunicated, nor should they consider us to be excommunicated. Because in 1054, that's what happened. The Patriarch and the Papal Legate excommunicated each other because they were angry at each other, basically. So since 1964, we have basically said we are looking for unity. And here is a goodwill gesture that we are searching for unity. We also have an international theological dialogue, an official dialogue between the Orthodox churches and the Catholic churches, that they start with, here's what we have in common, and here's what we disagree on, and we're going to try to figure out how to understand this and what will work, right? So we have that dialogue going on, and they're trying to develop an understanding of the differences. For example, the prerogatives of the papal office. The Pope says he can do this and that and the other thing, and the Orthodox say that he can't. Well, what gives? When did this develop? Why do they think that? And is that actually the apostolic tradition, or is that just a discipline that was added later, right? So they're trying to work that through. And in fact, the document of this dialogue that was published in Chieti within the last 20 years, I forget the exact date, said something really remarkable, and that is, in the first millennium, the Pope did not have any canonical jurisdiction over the Eastern churches. So this is the official dialogue of the Orthodox Catholic Church says this. Now, that's not reflected in the current canon law of the Catholic Church, but maybe it will be someday. It's also worth mentioning, like I said, in the context of this question, that the Catholic Church recognizes the Orthodox Church as a legitimate church, recognizes, as far as I can tell, recognizes their saints and canonizations, and allows the Orthodox faithful and clergy to receive the sacraments in our churches if they need them. So it's very much an openness to that. Now, from the Orthodox side, it's sad to say that they're not always quite so willing to work with us on this. Like I said, the Church of Russia doesn't recognize even the other Orthodox churches sometimes. They're not currently in communion with the Church of Greece or the Church of Constantinople. So they are hard to get along with. So, something else. What's your question? Thank you, I do too. Okay. I just want to add one more thing, and that is, because our Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is a distinct Catholic Church, that means that you can belong to it in a canonical way, right? Every person belongs to one of the 24 Catholic churches through their baptism. And I say through baptism, I mean from the moment of their baptism, but not necessarily because of the place in which they were baptized. So if, for example, my son had been baptized by a Roman Catholic priest in a Roman Catholic church, he would still be an Eastern Catholic canonically, right? If one parent belongs to one church and the other parent belongs to another church, no matter the place of their baptism, the child by default will be enrolled in the church of the father. If one of the parents is non-Catholic, the child will by default by necessity, be enrolled in the church of the Catholic parent. If the parents specify, in the case of two different Catholic churches, the children can be enrolled in the mother's church, right? The not default church. And what does it mean to be enrolled in a church? What does it mean to be a canonical member of the Ukrainian Catholic Church? Ideas? People know? Follow canon law. It means that the canon law of the Ukrainian Catholic Church applies to you, because the Byzantine Catholic Church has a different code of canon law. The Roman Catholic Church has a different code of canon law. The Melkites and the Ruthenians, they all have different canon law. So if you're a member of this parish, you should belong to the Ukrainian Catholic Church so that you are living in legal and spiritual harmony with the community that you are actually practicing the faith in, right? It means that our days of obligation apply to you, and the ones of the church down the road don't, because you're actually coming here and not there. It means that the fasting days apply to you. It also means that I am actually your pastor. So if you have children and you come to this church, but you're a Roman Catholic, I'm not supposed to baptize your children, right? Your children are growing up in this church, but technically, if they're not Ukrainian Catholics, their pastor is someone else. And so I can't marry them. I can't chrismate them. I can't any of these other things. But if you're Ukrainian Catholics, then I am your pastor, and no one else can say differently, right? There's also the thing, I've encountered this quite a few times, that a child, usually it happens the opposite way, that it's an Eastern Catholic that grows up in a Roman Catholic church, that they don't know. They know that they're like ethnically Arabic or Ukrainian or something like that, but they grew up going to a Roman Catholic church and always identified as Roman Catholics. They go to seminary, and they finish seminary, and they're about to be ordained, and they're submitting all their documents, and they find out they're not Roman Catholics. And the Roman Catholic bishop says, well, I can't ordain you because you're not mine. I don't have the authority to ordain you. So that can happen both ways. I've met a number of people who found out, having grown up in a situation like that they're canonically Ruthenians, because it gets passed down the father's line, and they were just never raised in our tradition. And so canonically, they belong to a priest and a bishop who's, 1,500 miles away or something. And so they technically can't get married or whatever in the local Roman Catholic Church. So it's important to maintain a awareness and a consistency in your canonical enrollment in the church, right? So you should belong to the local church, the church where you go, the church where you live out your faith. Questions? If you are not Ukrainian Catholic and you would like to be, please come talk to me. It's very easy to do. You write a letter to the bishop, that's it. Okay, let's pray.